humility tonight. So I think humility is a Humility is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and we have a lot of different definitions for it in our culture and also like in Christianity. And there's a couple different, I think there's like two types of humility. There's like humility man to man, person to person, and then there's the humility you have between like you and God. And we talk a lot about the humility from person to person, because like what is humility? We say a lot in this church, like humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. It's knowing that everyone in this room and on this planet are made in the image of God, and no matter what gifts or what talents you have, it doesn't make you better than another person, because God created all of us in his image. So like, let's say I'm up here and I'm preaching right now for the first time in my life, and I'm probably not as good at it as Ryan is. If you go back and watch his message from last week, it's probably gonna blow this one out of the water, because God gave him the gift of vocational ministry, not necessarily me. But that doesn't make me less of a person. Just like if we come up here and we try to balance some chemical equations or cook up in the little lab with my little beaker and all my little chemicals, I'm probably, I don't know, but maybe we could try it sometime. I'm probably gonna be better than Ryan, because that's what I got my degree in and that's what I do every day. But that doesn't make me a better person than Ryan. And just because I've committed certain sins doesn't make me a worse person than Ryan, and he's probably committed sins that I would never commit. And that doesn't make him a worse person than me, because we're all made in the image of God no matter what. And I think we talk about that version of humility a lot, but there's also humility under God, which I think we don't talk about as much, and I think is a really interesting concept and can be really hard to wrap our brains around, and like how you can be humble before a God who we know created everything. We think like, obviously I'm not as good as God, obviously I don't know better than God because he created everything. But then in our day-to-day life, it tends to seep in a way that we're not expecting. And there's this verse in James 4:10 that I think sums it up well, which is, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. In order to be like raised up by God, you gotta start low. Because if you're like pulling yourself up all the time above God in your life, he's not gonna pull you up, because you're doing that to yourself and you're not bringing glory to him if you're doing it by yourself. But if you allow him to do it, he gets to get glory, you get to get glory, everybody wins. But again, this can be kind of a hard concept to visualize where you're at with God. So I created what I like to call the curve of humility. Look at that. That definitely didn't take me an hour to figure out how to make in Canva. So there's a couple different steps on this curve, and I think at any point in your journey, you're gonna hit every single point on this curve multiple different times. This is not, we're always gonna be at the peak, that's where we wanna be, but we're all gonna hit every aspect of this curve no matter what, no matter how hard we try. And we're gonna see that later when we talk about Moses. We'll get there in a second. But the first point, we're gonna start on the left side. Yeah. So the first point is what I'm labeling unworthiness / self-deprecation. And this is sort of what we call false humility, or as I'm gonna call it too, is like cultural humility, because I think this is how we tend to define humility today, which is that like, I'm not good at anything. Like God can't use me because I don't know how to talk well, or I'm bad at interacting with people. So like, how am I supposed to invite people to church? Because that's really hard and I don't know how to do that. Or like the person to person, we all have like that friend who's like, oh my gosh, my hair looks terrible today. Or like, I just feel like I look like a greasy rat. And I think we all have friends with that. We also all fall into that at points. Don't worry, I've called myself a greasy rat on occasion. But right, it does. It's not looking great today, Caleb. Just kidding. But I think we fall into this because this is like this false humility of like, well, clearly I'm not better than other people, but like me belittling myself makes me better than other people because I'm not like coming out here all glammed up, looking great and saying I'm looking great. I need compliments from other people, so like I can't do it. Somebody tell me that my hair doesn't look like a grease rat. And I think, thank you. I think this can be a really hard spot to be in because it feels safe almost. It feels like maybe God is like calling you to do this thing you don't feel equipped for, like maybe he's calling you to go and like talk to a friend about Jesus, right? But you're like, oh no, I'm not equipped to do that. I don't know how to do that. I've never done it before. He can't use me because I don't know how to do this. And it's a really, it feels like you're being, it feels like it would be easier to just listen to what God's doing, but it's actually easier to just belittle yourself and not do it at all. But what you're doing is you're also belittling God's power, because you're saying, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this, so he can't use me, go use someone else. And while whatever he's calling you to do may not be in your wheelhouse, like let's say like vocational ministry for this example, like my thing is not vocational ministry. But me like feeling like Ryan asked me to do this and God not giving me like a good reason to say no, like I'm putting God in a box that I'm like, I can't do this, I don't want to do this. So I'm putting God in this box that says he can't work through me. And I think we get stuck in that spot of I'm not good enough, so God can't work through me. And you're being so like self-centered, and you're caring more about what God can do for you rather than through you. And so I think this is a bad spot to be in, but we all end up here at points. It's not like an evil place to be, right? But I think as you start to lean into what God wants and how he's talking through other people to you, you start to see him work, and you start to give up more things in your life to him. And that's where we get up the curve a little bit, and we end up at, starting to see God work. So you're seeing in your life, you're giving things to him, you're starting to trust him in different aspects of your life that he can move through you. So let's say in your friends, like you're starting to feel like you can invite your friends to things like rhythm or church, and you're starting to see them come, and you feel like God's working through it, and that's really great. But there tends to be aspects of our lives we still hold on to. So let's say that you're like, all right, my friends, God, you got that. I'm trusting you. I'm going to do what you're calling me to do. I'm going to invite people. I'm going to talk about Jesus in my spaces. But my dating life, I kind of have that on lock. I don't need you in that part of my life, because I kind of just want to do what I'm doing there. I've got that. There's no problems in it right now. Or the flip side, like, oh, my family life is a wreck, like an absolute mess. And I don't know how to fix it, and I don't even know how God could fix it, so we're just going to leave that on the back burner. And it turns into the same thing of you're sort of belittling God's power in, like, he can't move in this spot, I think I have it in this spot, but he can have these other aspects of my life. And it's a good start. And you start to see God move, but as you continue to see him move and you give more and more to him and you say, God, like, I am a vessel for you to work through, eventually, you're hopefully going to hit the top of our peak, which is what we call full reliance on God. So this is when you are just like, I'm a vessel, I'm trusting you with every aspect of my life. I don't know what I'm doing, I can't do anything by myself, but there's nothing that I can't do with God. So God can just move through me, God can speak through me, and things might not be going the way I want them to, but I'm still just humbling myself before God, saying, God, you can use me in any way you want. I'm listening to you. I'm listening to the people around me who you've put in my life. And you've just given him everything you want. And this is the spot we want to be. It can be hard to hit, but it's a spot we want to be at. But I do think sometimes through this spot and watching God move, we tend to come into the other side. And we start sliding down to where we start with starting to see yourself work. So you've seen God work through you, and you're like, okay, I know how God works. We're figuring it out. And instead of it being like this new thing of like, oh, I'm seeing how God works, he can do anything through me, you're starting to think, oh, I've seen how God works, so now I know what he can do. And let's say like, Ryan comes to us one night and is like, I feel like the Holy Spirit is telling me we're not going to do a discussion night tonight. We just want everyone to just like hang out and do all this stuff because that's what the Spirit is telling you to do. And we're like, no. We've seen God move in this way in our discussion nights. Why would he be telling us to do something else? Because we think we know the only way God operates because we've seen him move in that aspect. And it's really, really hard to catch when you're doing this because you think you're following God because you've seen him move in these ways before. But it becomes this pride of you think you know how God works, and it's putting him in a box in a different way. It's putting him in a box of, I know how he works, he's worked in this way, So he's going to work in this way again, which he can, but he also changes up how he works all the time. Read the Bible. There's a lot of different ways he works through a lot of different people. And then this can slip you to the end, which is just full self-reliance, where if you're seeing God work in a ton of ways and you're like, okay, I got this, I know what I'm doing, and let's say like, we still do the discussion night, even though Ryan has come to us and been like, no, we're not going to do that. The Holy Spirit feels like we're calling us this way, but all the leaders are like, well, we know God's going to work in this way, and then it doesn't work. We can hit like sort of one of 2 points, which is either, okay, God didn't work in that way, so maybe we just need to change a little more. I've seen him work in this way instead, and still rely on all the things we know about God instead of listening to what he's calling us to, and you sort of just have this pride of, I know how he works, excuse me, and so I'm going to do this on my own under the guise of I'm listening to God, but you're not really talking to him about what you're doing. So sorry. Thank you. Allergies are hitting hard. So we're going to look at this through the life of the man who was literally in the Bible. It says somewhere in Numbers, I don't have the exact verse, but it says he was the most humble man to grace the face of the earth. So it feels like he's a good person to learn about humility from, right? So we're going to talk about Moses, and I'm going to give you a little bit of exposition, and then we're going to get into some Skybal hardcore for a minute, but don't worry, it's not that much. So if you don't know the story of Moses, back in his day, the Egyptians were in slavery for like a couple hundred years, and they hadn't heard God speak to them. And so this is like generations. If God doesn't speak to me for like a week, I get upset with him. These people have not heard him in like 100 years. So they're pretty upset. They're in slavery under Pharaoh in Egypt, and Pharaoh is starting to see that the Israelites, there's too many of them. So he's like, if any of the Israelites have a baby boy, kill him, because we just don't want any more. And Moses' mom has a kid and is like, well, I don't really want to kill him. So she makes a basket, puts him in the basket, sends him down the river as a baby. And somebody picks him up, and it happens to be Pharaoh's daughter. So Moses ends up growing up in the palace and having all these resources and all these things. And then one day, he rolls out of the temple, or I don't think it was a temple, he rolls out of the palace, and he sees an Egyptian slave driver beating up an Israelite slave. And Moses gets real angry and kills the slave driver, which to us like kind of seems like justice, but to Pharaoh was not very cash money. So Pharaoh was like, I'm going to kill you. And Moses was like, I don't really want to die. So he runs into the wilderness and ends up with some Israelites, hanging out with them, starts living with them. And one day he's out with his flock, hanging out with his sheep, and he's walking and a bush catches on fire. And to us, like, if I'm walking my dog in my neighborhood and a bush catches on fire, I'm stopping, because that's crazy. But he's in the desert, and spontaneous combustion does actually happen in very hot spots with dry brush. So it's not an insane thought that he might have seen something catch on fire randomly before. But then what's weird about it too is this is a very dry thing because we're in the desert. And so it's all these sticks and twigs, which normally if you're like making a bonfire, that's what you put on to start the fire and get the logs burning, but they're not burning up. And so he's like, that's weird. And then it gets weirder because the bush talks to him. And so he's going over, and so this is in Exodus 3. Yeah, so Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Valid king. Why the bush does not burn up? When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. And the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land of milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Pezerites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So this is finally the chance they have been waiting for. They're waiting to get out of slavery, and God is telling Moses, I'm going to send you. I've got you, I'm going to send you. And I think we have this thought sometimes that if only God would tell me what to do, like with his voice, I would do it. Like when we get into these stances of like, I can't do anything, I don't know what I'm doing, God, just tell me. So Moses has God talking to him in a bush. And Moses' response is, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you, that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So again, God is talking to him, and he's like, what? Why me? Which is valid. I think if God told me I'm going to use you to take all the Israelites out of slavery, I'd also be like, but why me? So he's questioning God, and then God tells him, like, I got you, I will take you out of Egypt. And then his response is, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent you. So Moses, again, has a very valid concern of a bush is talking to me. What do I tell the people when I tell them a bush talked to me and now we're going to get out of slavery? I think sometimes we come kind of mad at Moses for like questioning God, but again, I think this is kind of valid. And so God is like, here's my answer. I am who I am. Tell them this. And Moses is still not satisfied. He says, what if they don't believe me and listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? So the Lord gives him an answer because our God is good. And he said, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake, so he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become white as snow. Now put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. So God gives him 3 miracles to give the Israelites. He gives them staff into snake, leprosy on hand and then healed, and turning the Nile into blood. And again, I think we think if God talked to me and told me what to do, and then showed me how to tell people showed me how to prove to people that God talked to me, I would do it. But Moses' response is, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. So God is saying, listen, I know that you might not be great at this, but I can work through anyone because I created everyone. I have the power to work through all. And Moses' response to that is, pardon your servant, Lord, please send someone else. After God has given him miracles to show, has actively called him to save everyone from Israel, Moses is like, I can't do this because he is so focused on himself and what he can't do rather than what God can do through him. And so God says, God gets angry. So then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, what about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. So God gives Moses an out, which is very kind of him. He says, fine, whatever, you're not listening to me. Your brother can speak, he can speak. But how much more glory would Moses have gotten to have if he not only got to hear from God, but got to be the mouthpiece of God too? But because, if we have my curve back up, he's so stuck on this side of unworthiness and self-deprecation. He can't see what God can do through him. And he could have had he already he wrote a lot of the Bible and got to be in a lot of the Bible, so he got a lot of glory. But he could have had even more. He didn't even need his brother to speak because God could speak through him. But that's what happens when you're so self-focused that you can't see what's right in front of you, which is God being able to work through you. So, after this, the Israelites they do get out of Egypt. So if you know the story, there's 10 plagues that happen, and God basically bullies the Egyptians to prove his existence. And finally, Pharaoh's like, after the 10th plague, Pharaoh's like, get out of here, I hate you all, please leave. And so they leave. Moses parts the Red Sea, kills a bunch of the Egyptians while the Israelites are getting through the Red Sea. And they're out in the wilderness now. They've gotten out of Egypt, they're out of slavery. Hoorah! So, they're wandering. As it mentioned before, Jesus said, like, I'm trying to bring you to a place of the land of milk and honey and all this stuff. We call that the promised land. And they're wandering in the desert for a while. And by a while, I mean like years. And God has been providing for them through this. There's been wars, there's been all sorts of stuff. He's given them like this manna, which is like bread that like never runs out. There's all this cool stuff. But one day they're wandering in the desert and they don't have any water. And so the Israelites are real upset. I get upset when I forget my water bottle at Rhythm, and I cry a little bit. And so I can't imagine being stuck in the desert and having no water. But they are there. And so this is in Exodus 17, so a little while later. It says, the whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? So Moses' response is a lot different this time than last time when he was talking to God. This time he's like, why are you yelling at me? Why are you testing the Lord? We've seen how much he works and how much he loves us. And the Israelites go, I'd rather be in slavery. And so Moses cries out to the Lord, what am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. And the Lord answered Moses, go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb, strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. So God tells Moses, go hit this rock. Moses takes his staff, he hits the rock, and water comes out. And everyone gets to drink and is super happy. And so we're back on my curve, beautiful curve. We're seeing finally Moses up at this like full reliance on God. His first response when the people are yelling is, we've seen God work, he's gonna work, he's got us. And then he goes and talks to God, and he's a little angry, he's like, the people are gonna kill me. But his first response is to go and talk to God, and then God provides, and God works through him. Because Moses has found this humility of, God, I don't know what I'm doing, but you do, and you can use me as your vessel. And this is where we all want to be, because super cool things get to happen through us when this happens. Yeah. When Moses is humble, he gets to part the Red Sea, he gets to get water out of a rock. And I know if I had an inkling of God telling me to get in front of a giant group of people and hit a rock with a staff and water will come out, I would hesitate. But Moses has seen how God can move through people, and he just has this full, unabashed reliance on God. It's this beautiful thing here where he gets to provide for his people. And then, a while later, they are wandering through the desert again. It's been a long time. I think they end up wandering through the desert for like 40 years. So, again, if God does for like 6 days, I'm mad. 40 years, I kind of get it. These people are angry, and it happens again. They don't have any water, and they're mad. So this is in Numbers. And he says, now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, if only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into the wilderness, that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink. So again, people have seen God move, he's seen him hit a rock, and they're like, please, can we go back to slavery? We had food, we had water. And Moses' response, like the last time, is to go to God. So Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of the meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. So it sounds really similar to what just happened in the previous one. And then God says, speak to that rock before their eyes, and water will pour, and it will pour out its water. And you will bring water out of the rock for the community, so that they and their livestock can drink. So again, very similar to what just happened. The only difference is God tells him to talk to the rock instead of hit the rock. He still tells him to take his staff, get up in front of all the Israelites, and just talk to this rock. At this point, Moses has seen him move and do incredible things. So Moses' response is, take the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. So, again, God spoke straight to Moses and Aaron's face. And Moses gets up there and hits the rock. And God still provides, but punishes Moses pretty severely. He wanders in this desert for 40 years and is then told, you're not going to get to see the promised land. And I think this is so interesting because Moses has seen all these miracles and seen God move in this way. He saw before, God told him to hit a rock, and he hit a rock and water came out. And so he's here again, and God's telling him to do something different. Something that's less cool, first of all, and also just a little bit weirder. Just talk to the rock. And Moses instead does what God has told him to do before. And so this is, if we're on our curve, I think, again, what I talked about, like starting to see yourself work. He thinks now that he knows how God works. And he's embroiled with a lot of emotion. He's angry at the people. He's yelling at them because they've done this before. But God called him to do something else. And he'd seen God work in a different way and decided that different way would be better. Because he knows how God works, whether God told him to do that or not. And like I said, I think this is a really hard spot to be in, and where, at least for me, it gets me the most, because you think you're doing what God calls you to do. For example, my dad became a Christian in college because his roommate was a really strong Christian. And when I graduated high school, I went to a non-Christian college, and I was like, I'm gonna be like my dad's roommate. I'm gonna bring all these people to Jesus, and it's gonna be super cool. And so I went to orientation before college started, and I met this girl who seemed really cool. So we hung out, and we were like, let's be roommates. It'll be really fun. She wasn't a Christian, which is fine. And I told my mom, and she was like, that's cool. Didn't you say you wanted a Christian roommate? I was like, no, I got this. We're good. And so I go to this college, and the semester starts, and I make a lot of friends, and none of them are Christian, which again, is fine. And I'm like, I'm gonna invite all these people to the Christian thing on campus, and they're all gonna become Christians, because this is what happened with my dad and his roommate. This is how my dad became a Christian, was he was surrounded by this person who invited him to all these things. His roommate literally put up like church bulletins all over his wall. I was not that weird, I did not do that. But I was like, that's so inspired. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make all these people Christian. And no one in my life was particularly telling me it was a great idea. And I think sometimes we forget that God doesn't just talk to us through his voice, he talks to us through other people sometimes. And my family was like, I think it'd be good if you like kind of create more of a Christian community before you try and just like make all these non-Christian friends. And I was like, no, I got this. Also, bigger problem, I didn't really talk to God about this. But my intentions were good. I wanted all these people to become Christian. And I wanted to prove to them that Christians could be cool. Because all the Christians they knew were like stuck up and boring and not cool. So I was like, yeah, Christians sometimes curse, Christians sometimes drink, like we're cool. And so I start to compromise my comfort and my beliefs because I want to prove that Christians are cool and accessible. And through all this, like, I'm still involved in my Christian thing on campus. It's called InterVarsity. I'm super involved in InterVarsity. I'm becoming a leader. I'm reading my Bible. But at no point am I talking to God about whether or not this is what he's calling me to do. I put him in a box of, you've done this thing before, so clearly you will do it again, whether or not you've called me to it. And long story short, didn't go great. Completely left the church for 3 years. By the grace of God, I came back. But I definitely fall a lot more on this side of starting to see yourself work once God works. And it's really hard, again, because it looks on the outside like you have good intentions, but you're not listening to the people or God around you. But again, it kind of becomes the circle too, is once you go full self-reliance, and then you realize everything's wrong, you end up back at, oh my gosh, I'm unworthy and everything's useless and I can't do anything clearly because I messed all this up, and then you start the whole curve over again. And so yes, it's a curve and it can be at any point, but sometimes we do circle around. And it can be really hard. But I think being self-aware is a huge part of this, and being in contact with God and Christian community so you can see where you are on here is really important. And also, I think trying to realize that you're a vessel for God to work is such a cool place to be, and takes work because it's really humbling, because I want to do what I want to do. I don't want to be a vessel for someone else to do stuff. It can be really hard. But we have the coolest view of this in the world with Jesus, who's kind of like the whole guy we're trying to be like on this earth. And Jesus is up in heaven with God above all of us, right? Perfect being, amazing. And he agrees to come to earth to be a human, to be the one type of creature that sins and is terrible and murders and sucks, because he knows God's plan is bigger. There's this verse in Philippians 2 where it says, "And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name." Because he humbled himself enough to say, God, I am your vessel. You can work through me in every way. Enough that he came down here, people hated him, he was humiliated beyond belief, died on the cross, literally tortured. But God's plan was so much bigger than him, and he knew that. And if we can just get out of our heads about either I know better or I'm unworthy and God can't use me, we get to be exalted up higher than we can ever imagine, and it's a great place to be. And so I just want to ask you, where do you think you are on this curve? And just think about it. And yeah, that's my sermon. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.